Nicolás Maduro is the man who went from being a bus driver to becoming one of the most authoritarian leaders of the 21st century. While his speeches exalted the Bolivarian Revolution and promised a prosperous future for Venezuela, his administration was soon overshadowed by corruption, authoritarianism, and repression. From his meteoric rise as Hugo Chávez's successor to accusations of drug trafficking and human rights violations, Maduro has become the focal point of one of the darkest chapters in Latin American history. In this journey, we will go beyond the promises and propaganda to reveal the secrets and controversies that have defined his leadership. This is the price of Nicolás Maduro's success. Beginnings and early controversies. Maduro began his political career as a trade unionist for the Caracas Metro, a position that seemed harmless until he used his connections to climb the ranks of the Bolivarian movement, led by Hugo Chávez. During these years, unsettling rumors began to surface. Ties to radical groups and questionable strategies to eliminate his political opponents. In 2012, Hugo Chávez, weakened by cancer, chose Maduro as his successor. For many, it was a baffling decision. Maduro lacked Chávez's oratory skills and charisma, but had something else: blind loyalty to Chavismo, and, according to critics, a willingness to do whatever it takes to stay in power. Following Chávez's death, Maduro rose to power, but his leadership ushered in unprecedented chaos. The elections that brought him to power were fraught with irregularities, allegations of fraud, media manipulation, and a completely biased National Electoral Council marked his victory. What began as a questionable leadership quickly escalated into a strategy for total control. The humanitarian and economic crisis. A country with the largest oil reserves in the world, reduced to misery. How did Venezuela reach this abyss? Maduro's years in power turned into a nightmare for Venezuela. With inflation reaching historic levels and a humanitarian crisis that forced millions to flee, accusations soon followed. Corruption, mismanagement of public resources, and collusion with criminal networks. Meanwhile, Maduro blamed external enemies, but evidence of internal mismanagement began to emerge. While the population faced hunger and despair, elites close to the regime amassed fortunes. International investigations revealed cases of money laundering, embezzlement of public funds, and links to drug trafficking networks. The contrast was staggering. While some enjoyed luxury abroad, others in Venezuela scavenged through trash to eat. Mass protests erupted in Venezuela in 2014, 2017, and 2019. Maduro used military power to maintain control, brutally repressing the massive demonstrations against his government. Protesters demanding food, medicine, and democracy were met with violence. Arbitrary detentions, forced disappearances, and targeted killings. One of the most emblematic cases was Fernando Albán, an opposition politician who died in 2018 while in custody of the Bolivarian National Intelligence Service. Although the government claimed it was an apparent cover-up for an assassination intended to silence his voice. The world watched in horror as Maduro's government responded. Human rights groups accused his regime of crimes against humanity, while Maduro defended himself with a smile, accusing his opponents of conspiring against him. But could such violence truly be justified? Maduro understood that to stay in power, he had to control the narrative. He shut down independent TV channels, blocked websites, and persecuted journalists. In an unprecedented move, he expelled international media outlets like CNN, and restricted access to platforms such as YouTube and Twitter during critical moments. The population was isolated from the rest of the world, relying on clandestine media and social networks for information. Even these networks were not safe from the regime's surveillance, as Maduro implemented a cyber espionage system to identify and persecute online critics. The electoral farce. In a true democracy, elections reflect the will of the people. But under Nicolás Maduro's regime, the ballot boxes became tools of manipulation and control. Every electoral process during his tenure has been questioned, overshadowed by allegations of fraud, intimidation, and authoritarianism. Election after election, Maduro remained in power, but not without controversy. Allegations of electoral fraud and manipulation dominated international headlines. Irregularities were uncovered, from suspicious voting machines to voter intimidation. Despite this, Maduro consolidated his authority, and the world became divided between those who recognized him as the legitimate president and those who saw him as a dictator. Maduro faced candidates without genuine popular support, ensuring his victory in widely criticized processes labeled as farces. The opposition denounced practices such as vote buying, where voters were pressured to cast their ballots at official checkpoints in exchange for food or money. Public workers were threatened with job loss if they didn't vote. Independent reports revealed significant discrepancies between data from the National Electoral Council and observations at polling stations. The latest presidential elections in 2024 were no different. They were marked by controversies and allegations of fraud, plunging the country into a deep political crisis. Nicolás Maduro assumed a third presidential term in Venezuela, proclaiming victory in the July 28, 2024 elections, despite providing no evidence to support his win. International observers harshly criticized the electoral process. The international community, including the United States, the European Union, and several Latin American countries, expressed concern about Venezuela's situation and increased sanctions against Maduro's regime, which is now isolated except for support from governments like Cuba and Nicaragua. His personal life. Nicolás Maduro has not only been a controversial figure in politics, but his personal life is also riddled with secrets and controversies that cast further shadows on his character. Despite leading Venezuela for years, doubts remain about Maduro's exact birthplace. Officially, it is said he was born in Caracas, but some opposition members have claimed he might have been born in Colombia, raising questions about his legitimacy as president. Despite demands for proof, Maduro has never presented clear documents to dispel these doubts, fueling speculation about his true origins. During his tenure, Maduro and his inner circle have been accused of amassing fortunes, while the population faces one of the worst humanitarian crises in the continent. International investigations point to the embezzlement of public funds intended for social programs, which ended up in foreign bank accounts. Mansions and multi-million-dollar properties have been identified in countries such as Spain, Turkey, and the United Arab Emirates, registered under the names of family members or front men. This stark contrast between the discourse of equality and the opulence of his inner circle is one of the harshest truths of his regime. Nicolás Maduro is married to Cilia Flores, who is not only his wife, but a key political figure in Chavismo. She is, in truth, the main strategist behind the regime, holding tight control over the most important decisions. Her influence has also led to close family members, such as nephews and brothers, occupying significant positions within the government. Connections to drug trafficking and armed groups. While Nicolás Maduro remained firmly in power, a web of intrigue and secrets began to emerge. Beyond Venezuela's borders, investigations pointed to a disturbing reality. Maduro was not only leading a political regime, but was also allegedly linked to illicit organizations operating in the shadows long before he came to power. International investigations mentioned names like the Cartel of the Suns, and testimonies began to indicate that figures within Maduro's government were deeply involved. Meanwhile, his administration strengthened its grip through censorship, fear, and a loyal military apparatus. According to these accusations, the cartel has used Venezuela as a strategic hub for drug trafficking to the United States and Europe, generating billions of dollars. Judicial documents and testimonies revealed that officials in his regime actively participated in the transport of cocaine, using military planes and government-controlled ports to move illicit shipments. These activities not only financed the regime, but also consolidated its control over the military, which benefited significantly from these operations. But drug trafficking is not the only dark connection that has come to light. For years, Maduro has been accused of establishing relationships with armed groups such as the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC, and the National Liberation Army, ELN. These groups found a safe haven in Venezuela, where they could plan operations, traffic weapons and drugs, and finance their terrorist activities. Instead of combating them, Maduro's government allegedly offered them protection in exchange for political and economic support, creating an alliance that further destabilized the region. International investigations have also indicated that Maduro's regime engaged in money laundering to maintain its power. Funds from illicit activities, such as drug trafficking and illegal mining, were laundered through foreign banks and shell companies. This scheme allowed high-ranking regime officials to amass fortunes abroad, purchasing luxury properties while millions of Venezuelans faced hunger and poverty. Nicolás Maduro's personal life, much like his political career, is shrouded in mystery and scandal. From his disputed origins to familial ties to illicit activities, the image he projects as a leader of the people crumbles under the weight of the shadows surrounding him. A devastated country, millions of lives destroyed, and a once prosperous nation reduced to ashes. This is Nicolás Maduro's legacy, a leader who used power not to serve his people, but to subjugate them. His promises of revolution and social justice transformed into a regime defined by corruption, authoritarianism, and oppression. History will judge Nicolás Maduro, but the true verdict will be written by the Venezuelan people, who one day, sooner or later, will reclaim what is rightfully theirs: freedom, justice, and dignity. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the price of Nicolás Maduro's success. What do you think of his legacy? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.